A woman heading to early morning mass yesterday noticed something a little off with a statue of the Virgin Mary.
Standing outside the Church of the Sepulchre of St. Mary here in Jerusalem.
Most of the scholars I've talked to say he probably was. The evidence is not great, of course.
The Christian and Muslim worlds, as well as the East and West, can all come together here in the name of Mary. As the years went by after Jesus Christ was crucified, stories about his life changed because of oral custom and changes made to the Bible. Because of this, a lot of different ideas spread about how Mary died. Some say she died naturally, like in a peaceful sleep, and then went to heaven. Her perfect body could not be harmed by the tomb's filth. Her divine Son has taken her to heaven with him. Some people think she didn't really die, she just went up, while others think she died somewhere else, like India, not Jerusalem. She looked out for the other prophets and the holy men and women who were running away from danger. For decades, each Christian group and country stuck to its own views. That is, until scientists recently found where she really died. A tomb that has been closed for many years. Christians are now doubting what they thought they knew all along, what's real and what's not. Come with us as we show you how the Virgin Mary really died. What was just found in her tomb. The tomb was in the Kidron Valley, close to the Garden of Gethsemane and the Church of All Nations, which are both well-known religious places. Many Eastern Christians have said that the Virgin Mary, Jesus' mother, is buried in a holy tomb. The world was eager to see what was inside after being shut for a very long time. That's it, right? That's not how you get into the tomb. We're in the tomb. When it was finally opened, there was nothing inside. It has been proven that the books that said Mary did not go to heaven were wrong. Christians believe that Mary went to heaven living and whole, which might explain why there was nothing left of her in the tomb. Some Christian beliefs call this the Assumption. To make things even more interesting, some Christian beliefs, especially Catholicism and Eastern Christianity, have very different ideas about Mary's life and death. They are so different from each other that it's fun to talk about them. In Jerusalem, we're outside the Church of the Sepulchre of St. Mary, which is where people usually think Mary was taken up to heaven. To begin, Eastern Christians believe Mary did die, but Catholics believe she never did. But like Jesus, she died, was buried, and rose from the dead on the third day. She then went to heaven. One of four important views about Mary is that she was taken up into heaven. This teaching was made public by Pope Pius XIV on November 1, 1950. According to a book called Munificentissimus Deus, this theory is linked to another important belief, the Immaculate Conception. This belief says that Mary was born without any sin. These two ideas are based on the idea that Mary is the mother of Jesus, who is thought to be the Son of God. The Assumption of Mary doesn't say for sure if Mary died or not. Instead, she was taken to heaven. This is also believed by the Eastern Orthodox Church. They call it the dormition of the Mother of God, which means falling asleep. It is not an official teaching or dogma in the Eastern Orthodox Church, but this idea is still a big part of their history. In a message called Munificentissimus Deus, Pope Pius XIV said that he hoped people would believe in their own resurrection more if they believed in Mary's Assumption. He wants people to know that our bodies will be raised from the dead and taken to heaven, just like Mary's body was. Different stories say different places where Mary's Assumption took place. We'll talk more about that later in the movie. But before that, did you know that a new story about Mary's Assumption started to spread around the 7th century? This story says that Thomas, one of Jesus' disciples, wasn't there when Mary died. When he got there, they opened her tomb again and found it empty, except for the clothes she was wearing. This story has been told many times since then. Some versions even say that Mary dropped her belt from heaven to Thomas to show that she had been taken to heaven.
So there's a sort of aura of mystery around the end of her life.
Painters of Mary's Assumption often show this story. People all over the Christian world learned about Mary's Assumption, and as early as the 5th century, they began to celebrate it. It was made a holiday in the Eastern Roman Empire by Emperor Maurice around the year 600. Some experts believe that the stories about Mary being taken up by God and asleep, or dormition, come from early Christian books that aren't even in the Bible we use today. Some Bible experts believe that a group of Jewish Christians in Jerusalem heard stories about how Mary's life ended. They think that these stories were told during or soon after the time of the apostles and are based on real events. The stories about Mary's Assumption and Dormition are meant to show that the stories are real by looking at these oral traditions. Shoemaker, on the other hand, says that these stories are not from the same culture and are very different from one another. They come from a lot of different places instead. In fact, they have changed over time. There is a long history behind the belief in Mary's Assumption. Even scholars who believe in the stories told orally agree that the belief we have today is not based on the original story. The story of Mary's Assumption was first written down in a book called the Liber Requiem Mariae, which means Book of Mary's Repose. That was written in the 1700s or 1800s. This book isn't thought to be completely reliable, and what it says about Mary is very different from what most Christians think. Old stories about Mary's Assumption aren't always clear, and they don't all agree on what happened. There are stories that support the idea that Mary went to heaven and others that don't. Stephen J. Shoemaker says that there is no proof that people believed in Mary's Assumption before the 5th century. When Epiphanius of Salamis looked into Mary's death in the 4th century, he was the only one who couldn't find any solid evidence. This is where things get really interesting. It turns out that the New Testament doesn't talk about how Mary died. Also, early Christians didn't write anything about how she died. Epiphanius couldn't find a reliable story about how Mary's life ended, but his works show that people already had different ideas about what happened. He talked about 3 different beliefs. Some folks believed Mary died peacefully. Some people thought she died to be a hero. Some people thought she never died at all. Epiphanius also said that Mary was like Elijah because she went to heaven without dying. Mary was taken up to heaven. When her time on earth was over, she was taken to heaven, body and soul.
Mary was assumed into heaven at the end of her earthly life. She was taken up body and soul into heaven.
Later works, like De Obitu Domini and De Transitu Virginis, which were probably written in the 5th century and aren't thought to be completely reliable, repeated this idea. There were also writers like Gregory of Tours and Dionysius the Areopagite, who also told stories like this. Before the 6th century, the idea of Mary's Assumption was not officially recognized, but these works helped spread the belief in it. But by the 8th century, most people believed it. And John of Damascus wrote that Mary died in front of the apostles. They were shocked when they got to her tomb, though. They thought her body had been taken to heaven because her tomb was empty when they opened it. The joy of Mary's death, which came from the Eastern Church and got to the Western Church in the 700s. In some church calendars from the 9th century, the name of the holiday changed over time to the Assumption. Pope Leo IV added a vigil and an octave to the feast day in the same century. These are important religious events that made the day more significant. It was later put on the same level as Christmas and Easter by Pope Nicholas I. These are 2 of the most important holidays in the Christian calendar. In the 1100s, a German nun named Elizabeth of Schonau saw Mary and Jesus. Transcripts that have a big impact on how the Western Church sees Mary's Assumption. Later, Pope Benedict XIV said that believing in Mary's Assumption was a fair view, and that not believing in it would be disrespectful to God. People said Gilles Boers had seen the Virgin Mary. On May 1, 1950, he gave Pope Pius XIV a message that Mary had asked him to share with the Pope. The message was about the idea that Mary was taken to heaven. It was important to Pope Pius XIV that this point of view be proven right. That sign was Gilles' message. 6 months after the event, on November 1, 1950, the Pope made the Assumption of Mary a truth, which is something the Catholic Church says is definitely true. It's harder to do things because different Catholics have different ideas about Mary's Assumption. Watch out, because your voice might end up being one of them. Different points of view on Mary going to heaven. Some Catholics believe Mary died and then went to heaven. But they also believe that a miracle brought her back to life when everyone thought she was dead. People who hold this view are called mortalistic. It's also possible for some Catholics to think that Mary went to heaven without first dying. This view is known as illusionism. Some people think she died and was then taken to heaven. This is known as the mortalistic theory. It is okay for Catholics to believe the last two things, and Eastern Catholics celebrate the feast day as the Dormition. But there are many signs in Catholic practices like prayers, stories, and art that the mortalistic view is more common. Remember that Saint Pope John Paul II said in public that he believed in death. The Feast of the Assumption is held by the Catholic Church on August 15th. On the same day, the Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches honor the death of the Mother of God. People in the East fast for 14 days before the feast to remember Mary's life and death. Some people think that Mary died naturally, but that Christ took her soul right away. They also think that her body came back to life after she died and was taken to heaven, where it stays until all Christians are resurrected. There are different Protestant ideas about Mary's Assumption. Some groups that are more like Catholicism believe in a physical assumption, but most Protestants don't. In the Anglican tradition, too, people have different views. Some accept the Assumption, others don't, and still others don't care either way. The theory wasn't used much in Anglican worship for a long time, but it was celebrated by some Anglo-Catholic groups in the 20th century under different names. There is a feast day today in many Anglican churches, but each one has a different name and theme. The Scottish Episcopal Church just calls her Mary the Virgin, while the Church of England calls her the Blessed Virgin Mary, without saying what she is thought to be. In the United States, the Episcopal Church honors Saint Mary the Virgin, Mother of our Lord Jesus Christ. In other parts of the world, like Canada, the Anglican Church of Canada celebrates the day as the Blessed Virgin Mary going to sleep, which is yet another word for the Dormition. Marble has been on top of the tomb of Jesus Christ in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem for hundreds of years. In October 2016, though, a group of experts were finally able to see what was below. They were excited to learn more about this important place while working on a project to fix up the tomb in the church. The scientists found a lot of extra stuff under the rock when they took it off. They were shocked at how much there was. Christians believe that Jesus' body was laid to rest on a rock. Now they get to study that rock. Not only that, Catholics believe that the Romans killed Jesus Christ and then hid him in a cave in a special place. This part of the cave rock was shaped like a shelf. Either 30 or 33 years ago, this event took place. Jesus is thought to have come back to life after he died. A few days later, some women went to see his body, but found it gone. Jesus was put on a shelf that is now inside a small building called the Edicule. It looks like a little house. Between 1808 and 1810, this building was fixed up after a fire damaged it. The Edicule and the tomb inside it have been undergoing restoration by a group of Greek scientists since 2017. Professor Antonia Marapoulou, a woman, is in charge of the project and is leading them. They are very happy because they can finally see and study a very important place that has been hidden for a long time by a thick layer of marble. Scientists can learn more about how the tomb has changed over time by looking at the rock that made up the tomb in the first place. They can also find out how this place has been respected and honored for a very long time. Scientists have special tools and methods they are using to examine the tomb and make notes and pictures. This will let people from around the world learn about the tomb and see it as if they were there. The project's head, Professor Antonia Marapoulou, says they are at a very important point in their work. She also says that the unique ways they are studying the tomb will help everyone learn more about this one-of-a-kind place. The church shut down early. A lot of tourists from other places were standing outside, not sure what to do. They couldn't get in. There were many kinds of people inside the church. For example, workers in yellow hats, monks in brown clothes, priests in black hats, and other people in unique hoods. All the groups in the church can use certain areas together. The tomb where Jesus is said to have been buried is one of those areas. This church, along with another one called Mary's Tomb, was built around the same time in the 4th century AD. A lot of people visit these places every year. Over the years, the unique building that holds Mary's tomb has been destroyed and rebuilt many times. 5 Franciscan friars worked together to build the building that you see today in the 1400s. The Greek Orthodox Church takes care of the building the most, but other Christian groups also help out with some tasks. People have to go down a long staircase that is more than 1,000 years old to get to Mary's tomb. As they go down, they pass by two smaller churches. One is for Mary's husband Joseph, and the other is for her parents. They pray when they get to the tomb. To get into the small spot, they have to bend over. Inside, there is beautiful holy art and icons from the Middle Ages all around them. There is a calm and solemn air because travelers have come to pray and light candles. Before scientists finally found where Mary was buried, many places were thought to be the right place, and you won't believe how some customs have supported their claims. Some places where people thought the Blessed Virgin Mary was buried, people have different ideas about where the tomb of the Virgin Mary is. Karaites from Turkmenistan think that Mary's tomb is in a town in Turkmenistan called Mary. The town used to be called Mari. This idea comes from a school of thought called Nestorian. Another idea comes from Christians in northern Iraq, in a city called Nineveh. They think that Mary's tomb is near the city of Erbil and that it is connected to a mosque in the city of Mosul. Ahmadiyas believe that Mary's tomb is in a Pakistani town called Mari. The place where they think her tomb is now is called Mai Mari da Ashtan. But how did she get to these places if they say she died in their tombs? There are many stories and myths about where the Virgin Mary went after Jesus died. Remember the story we talked about Thomas that was going around in the 7th century? Well, the story didn't end there. It said that Mary and Thomas the Apostle went to India and died in a town called Mari, which is now in Turkmenistan. Thomas was the only apostle who saw Mary's body rise to heaven, according to this story. The others were taken to Jerusalem to see her die. The story goes that Thomas stayed in India until after Mary's first burial. Suddenly, he was taken to her tomb, where he saw her body rise to heaven, leaving only her belt behind. In his account, St. John wrote that Jesus asked John to take care of his mother before he died on the cross. After that, John took care of her. According to the book of Acts, Jesus' followers were persecuted in Jerusalem after he died. They killed St. Stephen with stones in 37 AD and St. James by cutting off his head in 42 AD. Following this, the apostles chose to go all over the world to teach the gospel. And St. John was told to speak in Asia Minor, which is now Turkey. He most likely took Mary with him to get away from the trouble in Jerusalem. There are two pieces of historical data that back up this story. To begin, St. John's tomb is in Ephesus. Second, that's where the first church to honor the Virgin Mary was built.
So up and down the ages, the church has had to deal with heresies. And in 428 AD,
that's why churches have had to deal with errors throughout history. It was Nestorius who was Bishop of Constantinople in the year 428 AD. In the beginning of the church, buildings were only named after people who had lived or died in that area. This proves that Mary really was in Ephesus. This chapel in Ephesus was the site of the Ecumenical Council of 431, a very important meeting of church leaders, whose job it was to set the definition of Mary as God's mother. When the Council Fathers wrote about Nestorius, they said that he went to Ephesus and found St. John and the Holy Virgin Mary, Mother of God. It is said that this tomb is in Jerusalem, close to a cool spot called the Dome of the Rock. Some stories even say that Muhammad saw a big light over her grave. After going to see Mary's tomb, Muhammad kept going to heaven. He saw Mary again when he got there. She was sitting in a special spot next to God's throne. He saw more than that. Angels were all around her. Arabs believe that Mary was one of the most amazing women in history. God picked her because she was so good and gave her all to him. She is often talked about with prophets and other holy people. The Quran, which is very important to Muslims, talks a lot about Mary, letting Muslims know how important she is to them. A lot of stories and tales, called hadiths, also tell us more about Muhammad's special trip to heaven and meeting Mary. In religious groups and churches that think that's how Mary died, Orthodox Christians fast for 14 days before the special day of the Assumption of Mary. This is done to honor her. In other words, they don't eat certain foods and don't have sexual contact. During the week, they have to follow tight rules and only eat certain foods. They also can't drink oil or wine. They can eat wine, oil, and fish on the weekends. On August 6th, which is the special day of the Transfiguration, they can eat all three. Fasting is a way to honor Mary, who is the mother of Jesus. Lots of Christians, like Catholics, Orthodox, Lutherans, and Anglicans, hold the Assumption of Mary as a very important holiday. People think of it as Mary's birthday in heaven because that's when she was taken up. As we already said in the video, August 15th is an important day for many countries around the world, as it is Assumption Day. Andorra, Austria, and Belgium are a few of these places. There are many more in Africa, South America, and Europe, like Burundi and Cameroon. On this day, many people in these places go to church and spend time with family and friends. Assumption Day is a public holiday in more than 30 countries around the world. France, Greece, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, and many more are among these countries. In some places like Hungary, Assumption Day used to be a public holiday, but it's not done that way anymore. Some groups, like Albanian Catholics, celebrate Assumption Day in other places, like Montenegro. Some places in Germany and Switzerland are closed on Assumption Day. In Germany, Bavaria and Saarland are closed, and 14 of the 26 cantons in Switzerland are closed. Many people celebrate this day in Santa Maria Nabaj, Guatemala's main city, and in other towns where Mary is revered as a saint. Assumption Day and Mother's Day are marked at the same time in some places, like Costa Rica and parts of Belgium. It's still a big deal for many Catholics, Eastern Orthodox Christians, and Oriental Orthodox Christians in places where it's not a public holiday. In places like the Czech Republic, Ireland, Mexico, the Philippines, and Russia, people still celebrate this day in different ways, such as with religious events and other customs. It is the most important Eastern Orthodox Church holiday in Bulgaria to honor the Holy Virgin Mary on the Feast of the Assumption. A lot of people pray and bring gifts to church. In Varna, there is even a procession with a holy icon and music. On Assumption Day, many places have big parties and church events. For the Acadian people in Canada, Assumption Day is a big deal because they see Mary as their patron saint. Some stores are closed today in places where a lot of people speak French, like parts of New Brunswick. It is also a public holiday in Malta on August 15th, which is Mary's feast day. She is the patron saint of Malta. On August 15th, people in Malta celebrate the Assumption with big church events. On Assumption Day, there is also a big event in the Texas town of Praha that draws a lot of people. Not all churches use the name Assumption Day, even though a lot of Christians think it's important. Some Anglican and Lutheran churches celebrate the feast, but they don't call it Assumption Day. Today, August 28th instead of August 15th, is Assumption Day in some Eastern Orthodox churches that use the Julian calendar. Which of these stories about where Mary died and is buried do you believe the most? Do you celebrate the Assumption of the Virgin Mary? Tell us in the comments. Please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next videos.